So in my Cycling of Matter project, I included all the biogeochemical cycles and how they flow through ecosystems. So the first cycle is the water cycle, and this shows how water is recycled through the environment. So it could first start when water is evaporated from the Earth's surface or from the groundwater, and it can rise up to the sky and condense into clouds, and then it falls back to the Earth as precipitation, and then it collects as runoff, and then it collects in oceans, and then it can evaporate again. So that's how it cycles back. And I included some vocabulary words, which are evaporation is when water turns from a liquid to a gas. Precipitation is when water vapor condenses and falls back to Earth as a liquid. And condensation is when water turns from a gas to a liquid. And transpiration is when there's a loss of water from leaves or when water goes from a liquid to a gas. And I explain how humans impact the water cycle by climate change and the use of herbicides, pesticides, and excess nitrogen or pollutants. And they can run off into streams and rivers, which can contaminate drinking water and contaminate the groundwater. And so I also included a diagram that I drew of the water cycle, and so it shows how it can start off with evaporation, and then it goes to the clouds, which falls as precipitation and then collects as surface runoff and then groundwater, and then it can come back up and evaporate. The next cycle is the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle shows how carbon is recycled through the environments, and carbon can move from the atmosphere to the ocean to the rocks and then back up to the atmosphere. So in the diagram that I have, it starts off with the carbon in the atmosphere. So that can be like I include a factory, and it shows the fog coming up from there. So it's kind of like the carbon that's coming from that factory, and that contributes to the carbon in the air. And then after it comes from the air, then it goes to the oceans, so it can fall back down, and then it goes to the rocks and then back up to the atmosphere. And I included some vocabulary words such as photosynthesis, which is how plants make food by converting light energy into chemical energy. Combustion, which is the process of burning something. Respiration, which is when cells convert sugars into energy for the plants. Decomposition, which is when dead organisms are broken down into simple compounds. And I explain how humans impact this cycle because we burn fossil fuels, which can release more stored carbon into the atmosphere, and this contributes to global climate change. The next cycle is the nitrogen cycle. So this starts off with nitrogen fixation, and then it goes into molecular nitrogen, and then into nitrogen compounds. So after nitrogen fixation, which is in the atmosphere, then it goes to nitrification, where ammonia becomes nitrates and nitrates, and then after that is a modification where the tissues decompose and the nitrogen is released back into the air. And then the last is denitrification, where nitrogen is removed from the soil. And I have a diagram that shows that. The vocabulary word is nitrogen fixation, which is when molecular nitrogen is converted into nitrogen compounds. I explained how humans impact this cycle because we burn fossil fuels, which also releases more nitrogen into the air. The last cycle is the phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle starts out with weathering of rocks, and the next part is absorption by plants. So that's when the salts are being absorbed by plants, and then phosphates are being absorbed by animals, and then the phosphorus can then go back into the atmosphere from the animals that absorb it. The vocabulary word for this cycle was limiting nutrient, and that's a nutrient that is scarce or limiting the growth of any organisms in the environment. And humans can impact the phosphorus cycle because we convert phosphorus into fertilizers, We can mine phosphorus and transport phosphorus. And I included a diagram for the phosphorus cycle as well. And the last part is about my closed ecosystem project. So, my closed ecosystem project is affected by all of the biogeochemical cycles, because the water cycle is affecting it, because before I closed up the lid in the soda bottle that I used for my ecosystem project, I put water in the soil, and that can be like recycled for the cockroach, which is my organism, to stay alive. And also there was soil. That was one of my biotic factors in my ecosystem, and that contributes to the nitrogen cycle. So I think those played a lot in keeping my ecosystem alive, and keeping my organism in my ecosystem alive. And it's still alive today after 2 months, so